Welcome to the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Join us here every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, or listen to our podcast anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, just to name a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where independent new authors come first. Ever thought about investing in commercial real estate, but you were afraid to take the leap? Well, Angel and Brittany Gonzalez aim to put any apprehensions you may have to rest in their book, Taking the Leap into Commercial Real Estate. Now, it helps that you already have a podcast, right?
No, yeah, well, so I'm actually the managing partner, and one of the things about 4 years ago, people were like, do podcasts, we got to get more information out because you guys, we always took questions on. But we always were like, man, I feel like we're kind of repeating ourselves in a lot of the things that we're saying. And we want to be as helpful as possible. So we just started with the podcast. Finally, we jumped and did it after about 2 to 3 years of people hounding us. And then we were like, well, while we're at it, we should maybe answer the questions in a book. And so then we did that, and here we are.
So how long have you had the podcast?
The podcast now, it's about, I think it's, wow, over a year, a year and a half, almost 2 years.
And
now.
It's going well for you?
Yeah, we've recorded about 100 episodes. We've probably been on another 50 to 70 podcasts. So it's going well. It's we're season 3 starts soon, so we're pretty excited about that.
So a lot of people are interested in commercial real estate, apparently.
More than I thought.
I mean, this isn't anything new, though, really, is it?
No, it's not. But I think that what I think has changed and what's made it more common is that people are have more access to partnering with people in order to do commercial real estate, where before it was big companies and it was people that kind of were part of a selective group, where now the common man can pool with other common people and now they can do deals together. And so we just try to really help people understand syndication and understand partnering with people and really the power of relationships. And so we just kind of hyper focus more on that. And I think that just kind of made it so that more of the people that were more like us, that were W-2 employees, that were high, level executives, I never thought about investing in this way. And now we're trying to give them that lane so that they can have access.
Okay. So what's the biggest mistake? What's the biggest misconception here?
It's actually funny because I remember before I came into commercial real estate, everyone talking about how it's where the shark lives, is only where the people have all the money, and it was all these scary tactics. Because we started out by flipping single family homes, and we were like, wait a minute, we think we could do the exact same amount of work for a lot better output. And I don't think it's as scary as people make it out to be. And that's probably the biggest misconception, is that once you get in it, people are so receptive to helping one another. And that was not at all what I expected. Everyone's like, yeah, I'll teach you what I know. Not even if you're in the same asset class, whatever it looks like, it's more of a collaborative spirit than I think people realize.
Well, I would think you'd have to have everything locked down into a legal agreement so that anybody decides to do something that wasn't anticipated, that you have to cover your butt, is what I'm trying to say, right? So, I mean, yeah, I mean, if I feel protected, I could see taking a leap, but I'm sure that not everybody feels that way. They were afraid of getting screwed, basically, right?
They are, but I think that what happens is that once you kind of understand that the main things that you have to make sure is that you don't overextend yourself or don't go into something without knowing. And if you don't know, partner with someone that does know. So on our first deal, we weren't the lead sponsor. We partnered with someone else that knew what they were doing. So we were able to kind of take that warp speed ahead type of journey when it comes to moving forward. And I think that was very pivotal, because it really allows, when people kind of partner with you and show you the ropes in a way of saying it, it kind of de-risks the factors quite a bit, because they tell you hey, that's going to be too risky. That's not. Make sure we have these documents signed. Make sure that people are really feeling protected. Make sure. So it's there's a lot of things in there that are there to protect people. if you and to do it right. And the best part about it is people are okay with being at the lead for those that are not well versed at the commercial space initially. But once you get going, it almost becomes kind of like a pay it forward type of a scenario where you get to a point where you feel like, hey, I understand how to make sure I protect my investors, I protect my tenants, and I protect our corporation or ourselves. Now, what can we do to really kind of maximize and help everyone move forward?
Right. Well, that's another picture people have in their heads of greedy investors coming in and taking over properties and pushing people out. What was it? Better Call Saul. There was a scenario at one point where they were taking over this gigantic property in the middle of the desert somewhere.
Oh, yes.
I think people just have that image in their mind.
They do. And quite frankly, that's kind of what we kind of try to debunk and kind of explain more of the factors. Like one of the main things I think was probably one of the biggest like aha moments that we had was the fact that we started realizing that our tenants weren't like you weren't, it wasn't like kind of like the same scenario as when you rent a house where you're the landlord and they're the tenant and they pay the rent and that's pretty much the relationship. When you're talking people like living, having their businesses out of your buildings, you essentially become partners. There's a lot of collaborative spirit. There's a lot of like making sure, because some people are like, hey, I need more space in the future, less space in the future. I need more power, less power. So you really become an active participant alongside people. And it actually, because of the fact that a lot of the people that rent commercial real estate buildings are professionals, they tend to act in a professional manner as well. So there's a lot of things you don't deal with that you would deal with in on a single family home, that in a commercial space you won't deal with at all, because people understand like this is the place of doing business, this is the decorum I have to act in, and they just tend to be a little bit more sophisticated when it comes to the collaborative spirit.
How much money does it take? How do you get started?
It's funny, but because I think it's a lot less than people imagine. I think one of the main things is if you're in a passive side, you can start as low as $25,000. If you are on the general partner side, you can start as much as about $100 to a couple $100,000. That doesn't mean that's not a lot of money, but the thing about it is there are tools that people can use, such as 401ks and self-directed RAs and all these different opportunities where people actually can revert or kind of divert funds a certain way, and at the same time making sure they're not having any unnecessary tax implications. So it's a lot. I think there's a lot more opportunities nowadays than people had in the past, because before it used to be you needed all the money up front, where now, because you're pooling with people, it does allow you to start with a lot less of a risk and also a lot less dollars up front.
Well, how do you know you can trust people? I mean, if I don't know anybody personally investing in commercial real estate right now, and I want to tap into my 401k, because I can do that, right? I can take money out of my IRA.
Mm-hmm.
I just have to pay it back. So the idea being I'm going to take out 25,000, I'm going to put back 50, let's say. How do I know? Like, do I research them on the internet? I mean,
That's a great question. I think that there's a couple of different ways to know. The first one being is obviously you got the big name guys out there, but because if you go with the big firms with a big name and that makes you feel more comfortable, just be understanding that the returns aren't going to be as favorable, because they understand that you're leveraging their personality, like a Grant Cardone type. But if it's something where it's but on a local level, there's a lot of active participants. There's a lot of active meetup groups that have people where you can look in your local city, find out like what kind of commercial real estate is happening. You can go ahead and meet with people, get to know them, back to being a relationship business. I think that people in the commercial space understand that relationship is really important. And so they tend to kind of, especially when people are newer, they tend to kind of be very receptive, but also kind of like more open, because they want to make sure that people feel good about being in the space that they're the uncharted waters per se. And so, and then the other thing you can do, there's a lot of like groups out there, masterminds and that's one of the things that we did in early onset is we started going to masterminds and kind of seeing what other people that were like us were doing. And when we got to do that, we ended up meeting actually a group of us that kind of is a group of 9 of us now, that we met bi-weekly. We've for years now, we've gone on trips together, we've invested in together. So it's kind of like the more you put yourself out there to get to know people and build relationships, you're going to be able to find that there's a lot of credible, awesome people that are in the commercial space.
So, do you on the outset decide, well, if it doesn't work out, how you're going to handle that?
I think from the onset, you got to know what your risk tolerance is. And then you also have to
Okay.
understand that when you do partner with people, there are a lot of different asset classes and the different ways that you can go about attacking commercial real estate. Again, I talked about it before, finding the right person that's the lead sponsor, like in our firm. We we try to make sure that we have now enough deals under management, enough resources for people to look at. If you go on LinkedIn, there's a lot of firms out there right now that are really putting themselves out there so that people can get free resources to kind of get an understanding before they put their money in play. But for the most part, once your money is in the commercial space, why people like commercial real estate is because it's attached to a real property. Unlike cryptocurrency, unlike the stock market, it's very volatile, but then when something goes south, you can go to zero and there's nothing to recoup it, where dirt is dirt. A building is a building. So at the end of the day, there's always value in real estate. There's always value in a building. And so that's one of the reasons why people really like the idea of commercial, is because it's not like, hey, I'm just putting my money somewhere and it's going to disappear if it goes south. No, it's real property. And that's what people love about the commercial space.
Okay. I just want to ask you a question about, there's been a lot of stories about investors and hedge funds gobbling up homes and buildings, and that is contributing to a deficiency in housing, low income housing. I know in New York City, it's a huge deal.
Oh, yes.
They've just bought up so much space, and there's nowhere to put anybody.
Yep.
There's nowhere to put, and there's empty buildings just standing there. Do you deal with that at all, or?
Two things on it. I would say the first part being is that is exactly what I think a lot of the people like myself that run more of your local regional firms are all about, is that we understand that there are companies out there that are driving their scarcity up. And by doing that, that means that they're driving their profit margins up, because it's really hard for people to basically, they control they control the money. They control kind of what the market is saying. Well, the way to combat that is by really partnering with people on a local level, because what that allows you to do is that, yes, the bigger firms, what they like is they usually like things in portfolios, and they like to buy up kind of in big chunks because there's a lot less work for them. But on a on a more regional and local level, you can do one-offs, fix them up, get them ready, and then really kind of help with the problem a little bit by being very like community driven. And the second component is that I think that is exactly the climate that we're in right now. Is there's kind of this pull right now where that there's people that are really focused on making sure that they get top dollars, and they don't care who they squeeze out. And you got the other group that is like the other camp that's like, hey, we have got to put more stuff out there in the market. So you're going to see a lot more ground up developments. You're going to see a lot of repurposing of buildings that used to be for industrial might turn into multifamily. You might see same things with office buildings. Repurposing of asset classes has become a real thing over the last, call it 16 to 20 months or so, because of the fact of the scarcity. And I think that that's how we solve it, is by being creative and by keeping it on a local issue, because the regional and the national level, you're going to see that it's going to continue to be a little bit of a problem, because of the fact that the guys with the money want to make sure that they really kind of keep the market where they want it to be at.
I think it's interesting your thoughts on keeping it local. I know in places like Hoboken where they have multi-use buildings where there's a segment for affordable housing, there's a segment for businesses, and then there's a segment for more expensive housing, kind of all in one building.
Oh, yes.
So you are able then to offer more affordable housing. That's really got to be your goal, right?
Yes, so you're right, and I think that that's where right now you have to kind of have that balance, because I know when people underwrite commercial deals, there's abilities to kind of find where the breaking points and areas that you can maximize revenue while not driving up the rents. And so there are ways to do that, and I think that there's a lot of people that want to help with that, and they're working with some of the local government. people, political people in the communities, because the community at the local level, they are offering grants, they're offering tax breaks, and they're offering eminent domains and all these different things if people are wanting to help solve the problems. And so if you want to be part of the solution, you can definitely do so, but you have to have a consciousness for it, and that has to be something that you decide early on if you're wanting to be that person.
Right. So I'm assuming you can promote your book through your podcast, right?
Yes. Yes, we can.
That's so great. That's great. It's great for listeners to hear you guys got your podcast going and then you wrote the book. So now you have a platform. You've been slowly building a platform. And you've also, not everybody has this kind of a platform. Not everybody has commercial real estate to fall back on and the kind of expertise that you can offer. So I would imagine that's working out for you, getting your book. So it's like you listen to the podcast, you get the book, we talk about the book, they call in and say, hey, I read this in your book. And you say, oh, well, let me talk more about that, right?
That is correct. We try to be very accessible between the book, the podcast, our social media. Like, we really just try to be resources, because one of the things that we found, it was hard to find a few things when we started. And we're just trying to make sure that between us and our partners, that is no longer a thing. And quite frankly, we're working really hard over the last year to really help with some of our partnerships to be as accessible and give as much information as possible so that people are not making unnecessary mistakes.
What do you do next? You got your social media going, you got your podcast going, you got a book. What's next?
The next thing is actually interesting. We are getting ready to be on a couple of shows, and then also we are going to be on a couple of national stages when it comes to some of the masterminds and stuff. So we're hoping to just continue to get the word out and just help as many as we can.
Thank you so much. This was very informative.
No, I appreciate you taking the time. Definitely.
You got it.
All right, thank you.
DC Page is back to talk about his two most recent books for Page Publishing. They are entitled Help Wanted and I Forgive You. As a former administrator for a large school district outside of Philadelphia, he travels the country doing talks on education, motivation, and health. And that last one is key, isn't it?
The idea of keeping moving, keeping energized, keeping positive, having goals, directions, no matter how old you are. So that's one of the things that seems to be on people's minds these days. And so I'm out there helping people to be encouraged about trying new things, going new places, thinking new thoughts, and taking risks. I have a lot of energy to do these things I've always wanted to do. So I've capitalized on having all these wonderful careers in my life. And I'm out there talking about those things and my books. My first book was Under the Man's Shoes. The second book was Help Wanted. And then this one, which I am particularly interested in seeing it on the market, is called I Forgive You. And it is about post-traumatic syndrome.
When did you start writing?
Well, I've been writing always. I did a lot of writing from my work as an administrator in a large school district, but also I wrote for the stage. So I have written many plays that have been produced. One at the Annenberg Theater in Philadelphia, other professional and non-professional theaters, and also for a while I had my own actors troupe, and I traveled around the country putting on different performances. Also had done for many years a lot of musicals. I wrote a musical that ended up starring Grammy Award winner William Warfield.
Okay.
And that was a great experience for me.
You're amazing. You do a lot of stuff.
Hey, I try. I don't know how well I do them, but I'm having a great time. I just want to try it all. I'll be 76 years old in September. I do a lot of hiking. I just came back from 21 days of hiking in the Alps in Italy.
Oh, I know you could write about that, but let's talk about your three books, okay? They're all connected.
The first book is really, if I would to pick one central theme that holds the whole thing together, is about friendship. And it came about because of my 40-year-long friendship with a quadriplegic who lived in California. And I was introduced to him by his sister, who was the writer Sandra Sykes. And because he was a quadriplegic, he needed a great deal of assistance, and I used to go either by myself or with my wife cross country to help him, to hire the aides he was needing at his home, and to just help him to be able to have his own independent existence. And so through those years, since he was a almost completely paralyzed person, when I would go, I would sit by his bed or by his wheelchair, and I would tell him stories of my life, because he had a very small life. I had a very large life. I was traveling and performing, and I had a lot of people and noise and children and grandchildren in my life or whatever. He did not, and so he was hungry for my words. And so I would sit next to him and tell him those things. And then, years later, when I got a phone call from his doctor saying that they thought he was dying, I jumped in the car and drove to California. I drove only because I couldn't get a flight out, and I felt they had put him in an induced coma, hoping they could get him to have some healing process. It did not work out, but anyway, I thought I could, if I drove out there, by the time he got out of the coma, I'd be awake and able to help him. But to stay awake when I was in the car driving to California, I tried to review all of the stories that I used to tell him. And so when he passed away, I decided to write those stories down. And so it's a story of the adventure of trying to cross country, being exhausted, staying awake, and reviewing all of the wonderful things we shared and in friendship.
Okay, now how does that tie into your next book, Help Wanted?
Well, I took me as the main character. And since I've been traveling around the country speaking at different places about that first book, one of the most frequently asked questions has been, what do you think would have happened to you if you had stayed working at the nightclub in New York rather than going to college? And so my publisher had said, that sounds like a great fictional book. The first book was nonfiction. And so I really thought about that, just for the hell of it, I'm going to give it a try. And so I wrote this second book, Help Wanted, thinking about my own past and trying to rewrite it if I had stayed under the influence of the kind of dark side of the nightclub that I worked in when I was a teenager. And so it became an adventure story, and that one takes place mainly in Italy. So that was the second book, and it was filled with adventure, and it's got a light love story in it and all kinds of stuff.
And you've got a criminal element, and
you
have
yes.
a life and death
yes.
chase through Cinque Terre
yes.
and
yep.
Florence.
Absolutely. It was, my friends tell me that they enjoyed reading it. It was a real break from my first book. And then the last book was something that I had thought about for many, many years, because post-traumatic syndrome is such a horrible, horrible, terrible thing. And I had a father that came back from World War II that suffered from it. I, for myself, was a drill sergeant in the Army. And so even though I didn't go to Vietnam, I dealt with a lot of people who did. And of course, growing up in that era, of most of my friends were either going to Vietnam or coming home from Vietnam, or they had died. So I saw the influence of the war on their lives, and decided I just had to write about it. And so that became the context for my last book. I thought about this a great deal to think how I could put this into context, because of my public speaking and my dealing with librarians from all over the country, and especially because my educational background kind of ties into that. They were many times telling me about how they have lots of books that has to do with the data regarding the Vietnam War or World War II, but mainly Vietnam, but nothing about the personal journey of it. No one had really told their story, and helping the reader to transcend into that environment and to really be there. And so the thing that kicked this into gear for me was when I came home from active duty. I didn't have any place to go, no place to hang my hat at this point. And I called an old friend of mine that I hadn't seen in years, who had just come home from Vietnam. And over the phone, we made a plan to go to the Virginia Beach just for a couple of weeks to get away. And I hadn't seen him, therefore I didn't know that not only had I changed in those many years, but so had he, until we got in the car together to head south. And I realized how much the war had affected him and made him a very angry and distressed individual. And I use that as the jumping in point to this topic of post-traumatic syndrome. While we were on this short vacation, I applied for a job here in Pennsylvania in a school district, and just on a whim. And I got the job. And so I moved here. And at that point, teachers were being paid terrible money. And so the only way I could afford it was to have a roommate. And so this guy, Danny, he said, well, he'd stay and be my roommate and help me pay for some of the costs of my first year of teaching. And through that year, having to live in the same space with a guy that was suffering so from the effects of the war, is really the main key that made the story of post-traumatic syndrome come to life. And that's kind of how I did this.
Well, with all of the public speaking that you do, are you able to promote your books?
Yes, I'm out and about all the time. I just came back from Syracuse, New York, where I addressed about, I guess, 300 people. A lot of the times I will speak to small groups, 30, 40, 50. Sometimes I have a couple of thousand people. It just depends on who's asking and what their each audience wants.
You are very lucky. So people are coming to you and asking you to speak. You know, there's a lot of authors out there that would kill for that, because they don't know where to begin. They don't know how to push these books that they've poured their heart and soul into.
I feel very fortunate for that. But a lot of people don't understand that they have to stay engaged, not just write the book and drop it. You got to get out there or do the tech thing to draw people in. And some of the things that have really helped is that, I spent many, many years on stage. And so I know how to address an audience. I know how to pivot and turn when I have an audience that needs something else. And I know how to grasp that, pull the energy from the audience so I can give it back to them tenfold.
Well, that's saying something. They say theater training, it's great training for sales. It's great training for a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that is so interesting and exciting to me is these public speaking engagements give me that opportunity to stay relevant.
Yeah.
I'm an older man. Notice I said older, not old. I'm an older man. And I don't want to just be that old guy. I want to be current. And the only way I can stay current is to be with people of all ages and all diversities at all times. And so that's my goal.
Good for you, man. That's good for you. I'm sure somebody's going to hear that and say, I'm going to do that.
I hope so.
Right?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
I do too. Well, listen, thank you so much. I enjoyed this.
Well, it's been fun, and thank you, and you have a wonderful day.
The title of our next book pretty much speaks for itself. If it's in your head, it's in your house. How to process and heal from reoccurring thoughts and memories of tragedy and trauma. Dr. Jacqueline Nelson joins us, and you've had a lot of experience, haven't you, helping people over the years, but we're missing something, aren't we?
Over the last many years, working with clients is really what motivated and energized this project, because individuals need therapy, they need help. And just because people go to a therapist does not mean that they get help. It does not mean that they make progress. It does not mean that they improve. So I'm writing this book, but I'm going to write a series of books to help people get this process started. I think people, well, not think, I know they have a unrealistic expectation when it comes to therapy. Just because you walk in a therapist's office and you sit down and talk does not mean that you will get the help you need. People need a plan. People need a guide. People need to know. Again, there are books out there that talk about, how to journal and how to do, self-help books. And there's nothing wrong with any of these books. It's just there is something missing because people, therapy, it's a revolving door. People come for a minute, then they leave. They come for a minute, then they leave. And they say, well, therapy didn't work for me. Well, it's a process. And you almost need to go to school to learn how to do therapy. You can't just walk in the room and say, I need help. It's more than that, so much more. So I have these conversations with clients all the time. And for the last few years, I'm thinking, I'm saying the same thing. And people say, oh, I never heard it like that before. So since they haven't heard it like that before, I said, let me put it out there. Let me put out it's kind of where the rubber meets the road sort of thing. Let me just tell people the whole truth. And it's not pretty, right? Because people think it's supposed to be this wonderful miracle thing that's going to happen because you go to therapy. Well, it's not. And I'm going to tell you why. This book is not in lieu of therapy. You still should go. You still need to process this, but it's more of helping people get this process started. What are you supposed to think? A lot of people ask me all the time, well, how do I believe? In other words, they're asking me how to process their own mind, right? So I'm listening to what people are struggling with over and over. And these are people that have been in therapy before for years and years. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, something's missing. So yes, that's what motivated writing this. And I can't wait to finish the next one.
So the first thing is it doesn't happen overnight. Therapy is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
So it sounds as if there's a lot of things, regardless of therapy, regardless of the amount of help that we get. What do you tell us to do in the book? It sounds like it's a guidebook.
It most definitely is. I don't have a whole lot of examples in this. It's more about probing the person's mind, going deeper, going past your conscious into your subconscious, really probing you, helping you ask those deep questions of yourself so that you can get the answers. Because a lot of times people come and they say, well, I'm just hurting and I don't know why. So I don't allow my clients to say, I don't know. Because you cannot fix what you don't know. And people constantly say, I'm just hurting, but I don't know how to fix it. I don't know what to do. And that statement is very depleting and defeating. So in the book, it's telling you how to go and pull from those memories, those events, the tragedy, the chaos, the trauma, what to do with it. It's not even a matter of just talking about it. It's processing it and doing something with it so that it doesn't show up again in your life. A lot of people are re-triggered later in life, and they always say the same thing. I thought I was over that.
Yes.
And you're not over it until you're triggered. You won't know until it's triggered, right? Until it's tested, but you won't know when that will happen. We never know when the brain will pop up a question, a thought in our head. We call it automatic negative thoughts, ants. And that's why mental health professionals gave it a name, because the brain will do it automatically. You'll think you're living fine, and then you're 45 years old and you're sitting in a church at a wedding, and pop, right there comes that thought. And if you haven't healed from that moment or that event, then you're re-traumatized. And again, that's where PTSD comes from, right? And so I tell people you must heal from the old baggage, the old trauma, because you never know when it's going to be triggered. None of us do. I don't. I can get a thought to pop up and I'm like, wow, I haven't thought about that in 15 years. But if I still have issues with that or that person, I'm going to feel it. I'm going to not just remember it. I'm going to feel it and relive it. Like people say, well, I don't want to talk about it because I'm going to relive it. Well, in this book, I'm telling you how not to do that. So you don't have to, and again, some psychiatrists say, well, you shouldn't take people back to their childhood because you're going to re-traumatize them. Well, the reason they're being re-traumatized is because they never healed in the first place. Not talking about it doesn't heal you. Because if it's ever triggered, and we have people in therapy that are 70, 80 years old, it's because they were triggered by something that happened when they were 20. So it can happen at any time. So that old adage about don't take them back to their childhood, you're going to re-traumatize them, we've got to take you back there. because that's where that thing is going to keep coming up, whatever that thing is, whatever the trauma, whatever that event is, and it's going to affect the quality of your life. So that's what I'm saying in this book, how to do that.
Give me an example of how you do that.
It's a process. So we start with journaling. You've got to get it out of your head. That's why the book says if it's in your head, it's in your house. If it's something that's still lingering in your subconscious, because a lot of things are in our subconscious, we're not thinking about it consciously. It can be triggered from time to time, but it's now journaling. Get it out of your head. Do not try to process everything in your head. Write it down, because the brain processes things differently when we write it on paper than when we try to figure it out in our head. That's why in school they tell you to take notes. When you read what's on paper, it's going to magnify. Now you're going to have to do something with it. It's not just a bunch of thoughts. People just try to forget it. They try to shake their heads like, I'm not going to think about that. When you write it down, now you're accountable for it, right? Now you have to write down the what. What is in your head? What happened, right? So in the book, I have several chapters: the what, the where, the who, the why, the how. So we're really delving in the what, right? Get it out of your head. Everything, every negative thought. It doesn't matter what the thought is. Sometimes people don't give themselves permission to think certain things. They said, oh, that's not the right way to think, or that's petty. No, every thought matters. And so getting it on paper is the first thing. Get it out of your head, right? Now we process. What happened? What the details of that? What did that particular event do to you? How did it make you feel? And more importantly, what did it change in you? Trauma changes a person, and many people are changed in many different ways. Some people become angry, or some people become complacent. Some people become withdrawn. Some people actually it affects. In children, even more so, it affects their personality to the point where a person doesn't even know who they would have been had this tragedy not happened. So now you've got to find what happened, because now we've got to heal what that traumatic event did to you at that time, because it never went away. It's kind of like the little child that never gets healed, or in effect, even adults are coming to therapy, and they're not realizing, oh my gosh, I thought I was over that. I thought I was over what my mom said to me. I thought I was over what, that particular situation with my grandfather or my dad or whomever. So the what, and then why? Why am I still feeling like this today? And then what can I do to change what that did to me? So if the trauma did something, say it made you angry, we'll just use anger. Now let's deal with the anger. Why are you angry now? Well, I'm still angry at the person that hurt me. Okay, now we got to process that particular moment, that event. Because we talk about in the book also, when it's a person that hurt you, as opposed to just something that happened in life, right? There is no healing without forgiveness. None. And we've proven that scientifically, biologically, spiritually, psychologically, it just won't happen, because you hope the unforgiveness of a person, you hold on to the hurt forever. You hold on to it. And the forgiveness is the releasing of that hurt, and it's a process. And I talk about how to do that in the book as well. How to forgive who hurt you first, because that's the hurt we're walking away. He hurt me. He abandoned me. He raped me. He neglected me. He abused me, right? Or she, right? And so the forgiveness and it's not for the other person. It's not for you to go and tell them you forgive them. That's not the process here. It's not for, how you see on TV people talk about they go to court and they'll forgive the person that killed their kid. That's not what we're talking about. That's not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is for you. It's for you to release. So a part of that is writing letters to the perpetrator. It is getting it out, basically getting out of your system what you've been holding on to.
But like you said at the onset, you still need a therapist. And as you will know, there aren't enough therapists for the number of people who need them.
The reason it doesn't get the attention is because you can't see it. It's invisible. It's inside your head. So when people can't see the pain or physically see something, they don't pay attention to it, even with society, even with the government, even with insurance companies, because they don't pay for mental health like they do for, if a person goes to a cardiologist or some other doctor.
Correct.
This
right.
is just as important, if not more important,
right,
because it's harder to heal from. It takes longer. There's no magic pill. There's no surgery that you can go in and pull out all of your bad memories.
Right.
Because again, if we didn't have bad memories, we wouldn't have flashbacks. We wouldn't have PTSD.
Right.
So there's no surgery to fix this. That's why it is a journey, and that's why people have to stay on the journey, because it's not a quick fix.
Well, let's hope your book can get people started until they find a therapist that they can afford and that their insurance covers and that is available. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
What does it take to build a man? Our next author has a few ideas in his book, Building a Man. I think your pen name is really interesting. Ravenspeaker. Where'd you come up with that?
I am Alaskan Tsimpean. My people live on both sides of the American and Canadian border. So huge number of us in British Columbia. My name among my people is Maaskamka, which roughly translates as the raven narrates, or the raven tells it. But Ravenspeaker is a little more poetic.
Okay. Have you ever written before?
I've been writing since I was in third grade. I would sit on my kitchen table and make up stories and write them out. Possibly other writers might understand this, but I didn't know what was going on with me at the time. But I would get into these big giant movies in my head and, kind of live through them and then go write down what I experienced. So it was almost like I was living whatever the stories were that I was trying to tell.
So you have a vivid imagination.
Very vivid.
Okay.
Yeah. Enough to take me over sometimes.
What made you decide to write about this and why now?
That's a great question. I was sidetracked for many years trying to put my life together because it didn't come together. There's this idea that people have that if you have somebody who has a strong intellect and that person is never really guided and taught self-discipline, you're going to end up with somebody who gets nowhere in life but knows that they could have. And that person ends up becoming really resentful. And a lot of really bad people in world history were basically people just like me. So the idea is, how do you take somebody who didn't receive any guidance? How can they still get out of the chaos of doing whatever you want to do at the moment, not really having any plan in life, not really having any structure? Obviously, I'm saying that you can't be a man if you have no plan in life and you have no structure in your life. You are going to be a mess. And if you're particularly intelligent, you're going to be a big mess. And you're going to be a mess that affects other people. So that was the story of my life. And along the way, I met different people who inspired me to change one aspect of my life at a time, to just do one thing differently, think differently, see it differently, however you want to put it. And it turned out that these were kind of building blocks of developing a character for myself that actually where I'm now able to live a functional life. I was able to realize my potential. I was able to realize the foolishness of what I consider to be my own profound wisdom. Different people gave me different pieces of the puzzle, how to put my life together. That is the book. Now, I'm a storyteller, so it's a series of stories. I'm not sitting here pontificating to you in the pages. I'm telling you stories that show you what happened that had profound changes in my life.
Can you give me an example of one?
It's interesting that one of the things that was completely true about me by the time I was in high school was I completely hated myself. I knew that there was something wrong, and I just hated myself. And I found myself just absolutely smitten with a young woman in my high school, Melina Wong. I'll go ahead and name her. She was the best friend of the person that I was smitten with first. So it kind of got transferred. And Melina had really no interest in me. And yet she handled it so well. she gave me such respect while telling me she wasn't interested that I started to respect myself. And boy, that just completely put me on a different path. And that particular story happens right about the middle of the book. I call it the greatest gift ever. By showing me respect, I started to respect myself, and I was a completely different person after that experience.
So it sounds like you didn't go too far down the wrong road before you were able to kind of gather yourself together.
Right.
So from there, did it get better from there? Is this where the building blocks began?
I guess you could say they start to bite.
They start to bite?
Yeah, the things that happen after that, at first I would have thought are of greater and greater consequence, but the more as I'm talking to you, I'm not so sure that's the case. Probably the most important thing that ever happened to me was developing some self-respect.
Okay.
However, certainly outwardly, the appearances are grander and grander as they go along. The obvious consequences look bigger from that point on. And as I state, and that sort of that midpoint where I just find some self-respect, just because you know the rules to the game, it's still going to take a while to learn how to play it. So that could be where you say it's the starting point. I'm a senior in high school by this time. Then I go out into the world and have to deal with the fact from that point, I may have self-respect, but what I have never had was any proper guidance. So I still don't know what to do. And, my home life growing up was just vicious. I was either neglected or abused, depending on what day it was. And, there was a lot of those kinds of things to overcome. But I guess you could say that was the point that really started. And I could even go earlier than that. An earlier story, before I had self-respect, I had to have a conscience because I had none. So there's a story much earlier, much before Melina, where I got a conscience. I found one. And that also had profound changes. So a lot of these early stories put me on a completely different path. And I got to tell you, reliving all of that,
That had to be rough.
something else. Yeah.
Yeah. Where did you end up?
I became a father. I was very proud of that because I'd never had one. So I have 2 kids. They're in their 20s now. And I have 2 grandchildren.
That's great.
6 and 4. I have been heavily involved in the one case, all my son's life, and my daughter's life, picked up with her when she was a teenager. But I'm involved. They know who I am. They know that I care. And I make an attempt to do what was never done for me, which is to provide some basic guidance, man's point of view on these things. And I think not enough is appreciated about that. In all honesty, I think that we need that balanced perspective. We have the woman's point of view. We need the man's point of view, hopefully in balance and in coordination with one another.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would argue with that.
Yeah. But it's not necessary that the reader be male at all. There's value in these lessons for anybody. What I've done, because when I was younger, one of the ways that I had kind of found myself was that I got into traditional storytelling of the Alaskan Tsimshian people, and traditional stories teach culture.
Okay.
And so there's a value there. There's almost a spiritual quality to understanding your culture and your traditions. So a huge part of that is using the art of story to get a message across. For traditional people, there's no such thing as just a story. In fact, that's almost an insulting phrase. Well, that's just a myth. That's just a story. For a traditional person, a phrase like that is an insult. You might as well say, well, that's just the Bible, or that's just Holy Scriptures. You're saying the same thing.
Okay.
So by using story, you can get a message across. And it's those messages that I learned along the way, the things that were never taught to me, but I had to experience. I'm getting that across to the reader. And so far, the people that are reading it get it.
How do people know that you've written this book?
Right now, it's almost entirely word of mouth. I've been so busy. But having said that, the fact that this has not been marketed except me just telling a handful of people, the book is selling. And it's selling far more than the numbers of people that I've spoken to. So there's clearly people are telling other people.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazon gives you this little report every 3 months, and I'm like, it's been 2 months since I told anybody about this book, and look, and still, it's still selling every month.
That's
great. Like, wow, that's kind of crazy.
All right. Listen, you have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. We hope to see you back here every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, or listen to our podcast anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, just to name a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where independent new authors come first.